Welcome to the Leo Training Podcast with Joe DeLeo. You'll hear in-depth interviews and tips from world-class athletes, coaches, and industry-leading experts to help you train smarter and improve at what you love to do. Train smarter, get stronger, move better, race faster. Here's your host, Joe DeLeo.
We're back with episode 70 of the Leo Training Podcast. This week's guest is Dr. Evan Johnson. Dr. Evan Johnson is a professor at the University of Wyoming in the Division of Kinesiology and Health. He's an assistant professor in exercise physiology. Dr. Johnson's interests include examining the physiological mechanisms and overall health benefits related to optimal hydration, physical activity, and heat exposure. Dr. Johnson, like myself, is also a fellow George Washington University alumni and member of the men's rowing team while he attended school there. So it was great to catch up with a fellow classmate. In this interview, we focus on a few key topics. We discuss Dr. Johnson's research on hydration, some myth busting around the altitude mask, a product that's been released in the last few years, wearable technology for weight loss, and finally, we also discuss the importance of grip strength and how that can relate to lifespan and longevity. Without further ado, let's roll to episode 70 of the Leo Training Podcast with Dr. Evan Johnson. Science myth busting. Professor Evan Johnson, welcome to the Leo Training Podcast. I'm really excited to have you on. It's been a long time since you and I have had a chance to sit down and talk. And for those in the audience that are tuning in to listen, Evan was responsible for taking me on my recruiting trip when I visited GW and ended up going there. So we were both fellow alums of George Washington University.
Absolutely. Glad to be here. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, you're welcome, man. So you've got an incredible journey. I kind of hinted that you started off your undergraduate at GW, but you've been all over the continental United States doing research and continuing your education. So before we get into some of our topics, you've got to share your story and talk about your education, what you've been studying, and kind of where you've been literally all over the map.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's been a long journey to where I am now, living in time zone 4 out of 4 for the United States. But it all kind of started back in high school for me. I had done a lot of kind of team sports growing up when I was really young before high school. And then for anybody who knows me out there, I'm not a incredibly large man. I was not sitting in the position that you were in the boat. I was sitting facing the right direction, steering and yelling in the back. So I'm a small dude. So when sports kind of got a little bit more towards size based, I was way into baseball. I've noticed myself getting worse and worse at them relatively. So I kind of got out of sports, got out of physical activity. And until high school, where just by chance, a friend invited me to come to cross country practice one day. I showed up for the team, 3 weeks into my freshman year. Everybody was already there. Everybody on the team, welcomed me, and, they were joking around, upperclassmen and everything like that. But it was a really friendly environment. I walked out to the track and the coach kind of came up to me. He looked at me and goes, "Who are you?" And I go, "I'm Evan." He goes, "Welcome to the team." And so it was that really great environment and inclusiveness in high school that got me into running. And I got a lot of self-confidence from that. So when I was going to undergrad, I'm like, all right, I would want to make sure that I continue to do a sport. So I wasn't particularly good at running in high school, but I knew I wanted to do a sport, and a sport that I knew that I could kind of walk onto was rowing. So showed up for rowing, and that became my 4 years at GW. Also during that time, I started out actually in the business school. So my first year at GW, I was in the School of Business. I had it in my mind that I was going to be the guy who wears a suit to work, and that was going to be what I did. However, within my first couple weeks in class, taking, entry-level business classes, I was really upset because all the other students around me were consistently asking, do I need to know this? Is this on the exam? That kind of stuff. And I was sitting there and I had myself, my freshman year existential crisis, laying in my top bunk, staring at the ceiling. I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I can't do this for 4 years if all it is to get a good grade in the test. And I'm like, I should study something I like. And then the next question was, oh crap, what do I like? And so I started thinking about that and just laying there. I'm like, well, I like exercise. How can I make a living out of exercise? I had a really great advisor when I was there, and she said to me, hey, have you checked out the School of Public Health? We have an exercise science major, and that was it. Once I started those classes, I was full on for exercise physiology and really, really enjoyed it. So that was my 4 years at GW. After that, I had a internship while I was there at one of the local fitness facilities, kind of working the front desk, checking people in. And part of my internship actually was going through the different departments. I went through membership, I went through maintenance, and kind of just saw how a gym worked. So I kind of parlayed that into a career as a personal trainer right after my time at GW. Me and another classmate from there, who were another athlete, got full-time jobs there. It was a great job, but I got really frustrated during my time because it was more of a accountability rather than improving people's fitness. I felt that I was there as an appointment. I wasn't there as a person who was going to make them more fit. That was all up to them. I also felt limited by my own knowledge. I was like, I know that these people can do more, but I don't know what I should be telling them. And I'm training 40 hours a week, so I don't really have the time to find that out. So I started looking for master's program and applied to a number of programs around the country. And I went and checked out University of Connecticut and had a great interview there and kind of went back. That's where I'm from originally. Did my master's there for 2 years, specializing on thermoregulation. Did a cool study that we can talk about a little bit later that actually came down after the Corey Stringer incident. So it had to do with football uniforms. So the death of the lineman from the Minnesota Vikings. We did a study based on people's perception of thermal strain while they're wearing football uniforms. Really fun study. As that was kind of finishing up there, I was fortunate enough to get a job as a contractor with the Navy working at the Naval Health Research Center. So with my background in thermoregulation that I gained during my master's, I went out there and was helping them with issues they were having with heat and cold. So heat being certain areas of ships that are, if you're talking about an engine room, those are pretty hot areas. They're wearing full equipment when they're in there. So talking about, okay, how long can a person be in there working for safety? Is it 20 minutes and then they need to take 10 minutes off, or can they be in there for 2 hours? How hot did they actually get? And then on the flip side of that was the cold side. So we had part of our research duties were working with the Navy SEALs and figuring out when they were getting too cold and monitoring them during training to make sure that no one was at risk for hypothermia. That was great 2 years, but with a job as a contractor for the Navy, it's kind of, there's one spot. It's not a spot where you can really move up. So I didn't want to be a research assistant for the rest of my career. I got the offer to go back to UConn for my Ph.D. and I took it. And during that time, my specialty kind of shifted from thermoregulation to hydration, because that was the projects that my advisor was working on while I was there. Finishing up after about 3.5 years there. And it's interesting, I didn't do my dissertation on hydration. I did my dissertation on heart rate versus perceived effort during run training, with the thought being that perceived effort would not be as good as at specifying intensity during run training. And we kind of found that, and we kind of didn't. We can talk about that a little bit more later as well. But did a lot of hydration research, ended up picking up a postdoc at the University of Arkansas after that time, doing another hydration study. And then during the end of that time, started doing the whole academic job application thing and came out here to the University of Wyoming, had a great interview here. And I've been surprised over the past 2 years, the levels of support that I've gotten as a new faculty member here. So really enjoying my time. So that's the long and short of it right there of how I got to where I am.
That's outstanding, man. You've had quite the journey, and it looks like it's just starting to pick up and keep going for sure.
Yeah.
Excellent. So let's talk about before we launch into some of the topics. All right, let's kind of tie the audience back into kind of what prompted this conversation. So I had shared on Instagram a post relating to grip strength, and mortality rate. And you had made a comment on the post, and I didn't realize until I had clicked through and looked at your Instagram handle. I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, I think this is the same Evan.
I know this guy.
Yeah, exactly. So
not just some old troll out there.
Yeah, right. So I ended up, I think I private messaged you or whatever, and we ended up, talking on the phone for 30 minutes or something, and caught up and scheduled this. And so that's what kind of prompted this conversation. So I think that would be a great kind of first place to start. So before I turn it back over to you, I think it's important I read that exact Instagram post so we can provide accurate context to the audience here. So I'm trying to bring that up on my phone right now.
Is this the peer-reviewed Instagram that we're referring to here?
Yeah, the peer-reviewed, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So the quote on the post that I reposted was, grip strength is a stronger predictor of all-cause and cardiovascular mortality than blood pressure, end quote. Okay. So you responded on that thread and said...
Can I interrupt you briefly?
Yeah, go ahead.
So that's a direct quote from the paper, and that is 100% true. So what if you could you read your statement underneath that?
Sure. So I had said, I originally heard this from Gray Cook, because it was, I think, during one of his DVDs. I said, but it's a great reminder to the importance of grip strength and the carryover it has to health, life, and well-being. And then you responded, true story and a fantastic study, but just be careful with interpretation. The results do not mean that training grip or grip strength reduces risk.
Yes. Awesome. Cool. So now we're on track. So this is the problem with, research studies in general. And the reason I kind of reached out to you is this is like a small pet peeve of mine. Because as researchers, we write these articles that are, scrutinized by other scientists who have experience in the field. And we expect that these results are going to be also equally attainable by people who don't have a history of writing in this style, and also, performing these statistical procedures and that sort of thing. And expect that everybody's going to interpret them correctly, or exactly. And it's not necessarily that you interpret it incorrectly. It's just, you have to be careful when you talk about this sort of thing with where you're leading the people, because the statement of the post itself saying, that grip strength was a better predictor of all-cause mortality over and above blood pressure is true. In this study, it's a fantastic study. They looked at, how many people did they look at here? Hold on, I got it right here. Over 138,000 people. It's a really large sample size. And they were able to measure everybody's grip strength up front and then basically follow up with them over the course of 4 years and see who died, and basically figure out which factors were related to people dying. So when you talk about training grip strength, that's not necessarily how it worked, because if they wanted to show that, what they'd have to do is put people into two groups, have one group train with their grip only and the other group not train, and then look at death rates in those two groups. That would be what we call a randomized control trial. This is an epidemiological kind of observational trial. It's a longitudinal study where they are following people, but it's not necessarily giving causality to this. But I think the authors in the study, if you go through it and read it, it's really good because they don't overstate it at any point. Some important points in here. Let me see if I can bring this up real quick. If you think at some of the things that were related to grip strength at first, So this is important to kind of know. So if you look, this is the Lancet study that I'm looking at right now. Things that were positively associated with grip strength prior to the study beginning. So this was at the baseline time point. Increased grip strength was associated with young age, male sex, high level of education, employment, high level of physical activity, high dietary caloric intake, high proportion of protein, increased height, increased weight, and upper arm circumference. So what you have to start thinking about here is what they call collinearity or covariates. So people who were stronger also had all these other factors that are related to health. So it's not necessarily that the grip strength is what's making people live longer or not die as frequently. It's the fact that people who are stronger also have a number of these other factors involved. So then what they do in their statistics, which is, commendable, is they account for these. So they do multivariate regression and they look at all those other factors and then they add on grip strength at the end and say, okay, after accounting for everything else, does grip strength still improve a person's risk? And they find that it does. So that's really good. But it's overall, they relate it to overall strength. Obviously, when you have a firmer hand grip or a more powerful hand grip, it relates to overall body strength, so muscular strength. So I'm not saying don't lift weights because it's not going to make you healthier. I'm just saying that when we look at these studies, we have to make sure we assess them for what they are. And the purpose of the study overall is to say, okay, if we want to assess a person's risk, this is a good thing to use. Similar to using BMI. BMI at the population level is really good at predicting risk. But we know on the individual basis, there are a number of people out there who have a BMI between 25 and 30 who have, 6 to 10% body fat. Are they at increased risk? Probably not. But at the population level, it's really good. That's how this kind of works too. At the population level, grip strength can be a really good predictor of health.
Yeah, that's a key point I believe you made right there is making sure that we're not getting confused between the individual and population levels.
Absolutely.
Well, that was great. We did a nice little deep dive on that particular study and provided some great context to myself as well as the audience. So is there anything that you want to kind of add in summary on that particular research study?
Just that you should continue to strength train and populations should continue to strength train because that will be reflected, hopefully, in stronger grip. And then if anybody out there wants to do a study, this would be a great cause for a follow-up to potentially do a study and see if actually resistance training improves grip strength and reduces risk factors along the way. And that's kind of the RCT that you need along with that.
Excellent. So next topic that we've got down here is regarding your research on hydration.
Okay. So I kind of have evolved into studying hydration, and it's important to the general population. If we think about hydration, most of the people probably listening are athletes or coaches. We think about it from an athletic standpoint, and we understand that proper hydration during exercise is really important, and also avoidance of overhydration, especially during long endurance events, is really important as well. But my research has kind of veered away from that towards the general population, looking at hydration biomarkers, so our ability to tell how hydrated a person is in their everyday behaviors outside of sport. We use the word dehydration and hypohydrated kind of synonymously, or the general population does, but in my field, they're completely different. We think about dehydration, that's something we can monitor. So that's you start exercising, you sweat during that 30-minute, 1 hour workout, you have lost 1% of your body mass during that time due to sweat weight, you are now dehydrated. On the other side of that, that's what we call hydration state. You've lost body water. We're able to measure that you've lost actual body water. On the other side of that, you have what we say is hypohydrated, so low state of hydration. And what this refers to is body water turnover. So every day you're putting water into your body and water is coming out of your body. But the rate at which that water is going in and coming out is what we refer to as hydration process. And a person who has a low body water turnover is what we're going to refer to as being hypohydrated. And the way we clinically look at that is going to be through urine concentration, because a person who drinks very little is going to have a strong stimulus to conserve water, because you want to maintain your plasma volume and your blood volume overall. You can't let your blood thicken up too much. So there's going to be a signal sent to your brain, your hypothalamus. You're going to release a bunch of antidiuretic hormone, which goes to your kidneys and prompts them to reabsorb a lot of water from your blood. So as your blood's getting filtered through the kidneys, instead of that water going into the bladder and being excreted, what happens is it gets reabsorbed and you reuse it. So the hypohydrated is not, so a person could be well hydrated or have total body water that's perfectly adequate, but also be hypohydrated, meaning that they have low rates of total body water turnover. And kind of what we're starting to see in the literature now, and what I'm, in the process of studying is, we see that associated with, a lot of kidney disorders. So kidney stone formation, specifically the recurrence of kidney stones. So a person who has had a kidney stone before, if they continue to drink low volumes of water, they're more likely to have another kidney stone. There's also some evidence out there and some physiological mechanisms that are available for urinary tract infections, chronic kidney disease, and also some evidence for bladder cancer that relates to those. During my postdoc, I did a really, really cool project with people with type 2 diabetes. And we found that when these individuals were drinking very low volumes of water, overall their blood glucose was a little bit higher than when they were drinking more or a larger volume of water. So, and now we're moving on and kind of trying to evaluate and develop some interventions for, okay, if you as an athlete or as a normal person notice that your urine color is really dark, how much water do you need to drink in order to get back to your normal status? Is it a liter? Is it 2 liters? Does it depend on your body size? Does it depend on your caloric intake? That's the project we're working on right now.
Wow, that's really cool. So you're actually trying to put something together for the general population that they can basically kind of look at the color of their urine and then almost look at a chart and be like, okay, I need to drink a half liter, a liter and a half of water to get my hydration level back up to a reasonable, adequate status.
Yeah, to bring my hydration process back into the healthy range, and to limit the duration that I'll be either hypohydrated or potentially dehydrated if it's following an exercise session.
Wow.
So that's what we're looking for here.
Have you started that yet, or is it just in kind of the beginning? Okay, cool.
So we are about 3/4 of our way done with data collection. We have 5 different groups of 25 people, so 125 people total for the study. It's 2 weeks of involvement, so it's a long research study. So my grad students are really busting their butts right now to try and get it done before the end of the semester here, and I'll be really happy when they do.
Awesome, man. Awesome.
Yeah.
Do you have a timeline on when? Obviously, you got to analyze the data and everything. Is there a target date to have the paper or the study published?
So the goal will be to present the findings at the kind of next summer 2018 conference schedule. So the 2 conferences that I typically go to are going to be experimental biology and the American College of Sports Medicine annual meeting. Those are the 2 big ones that I go to, and you want to present your findings generally before the paper is published. So the goal will be to have those manuscripts in preparation at that time, present them, and then submit them kind of following that presentation timeline.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, if there's any links or anything that we can include in the show notes once the episode's published or anything, let me know. And, I'll make sure that I add them in.
Absolutely. Yeah. And my big thing, it's a difficult field because there's some monetization of it out there. And, the study that I'm working on right now is funded privately. So it's funded by a company. But it's important to make sure that when you have those studies that you as a scientist have control over the findings still. And this particular company is very in favor of that. They're not looking to make sure that I say that, water drinking is the best thing ever. They're just looking for good hard science on this topic. In our field, we've seen a lot of negative effects of that recently, especially with some of the big soda, as they're called, influencing some research. And our goal is to really kind of stay clear of that.
Yeah, objectivity is certainly important when it comes to having a clear and unbiased opinion, especially when it comes to science.
Yeah, and there's debate in the field, and I deal with that all the time. And my whole thing is not, drink as much water as you possibly can. Obviously, that's not great advice. The research findings that we have out there that talk about the benefits of increased water intake are mainly on avoiding very low water intake. So believe it or not, there's 10 to 15% of the population that drinks less than 1 liter of water a day.
Wow.
And by doing a lot of these research studies over and over again, where we have people turning in fluid records from a week, we'll find on a normal day they don't drink any plain water. They're drinking 1 gallon of sweet tea or, 10 to 15 diet sodas or soft drinks or stuff like that. And what we'd prefer is if those drinks were replaced with tap water,
So are they even, if they're drinking, those types of beverages, whether it's sweet tea or soft drinks, are they even really making a dent in being dehydrated? Are they rehydrating at all?
Yeah. So classic misconception right there. A couple myths that we can bust right here. Those beverages have a lot of water in them. So guess where that water goes? Same place as water would go if you were drinking just a glass of water. The kind of old wives' tales about caffeinated beverages dehydrating you, and if it's a soda, it doesn't count. You got to drink another beverage to make up for that amount of water. That's not true. As far as we can tell from the data out there, caffeine doesn't dehydrate you over a 24-hour period. So that's a misconception.
Would that also apply to coffee?
Oh yeah, yep. Coffee's got a lot of water in it, so I wouldn't recommend making coffee your sole beverage of the day. My Swedish grandmother might disagree with that because I think that's all she drinks. But there is water in coffee, and if you're not adding sweetener to it, there are a number of health benefits to a number of the things in there.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good. First myth taken down.
There we go.
Awesome. Anything else that you want to, is there any general recommendations that you'd like to make to the audience in terms of hydration that they should be?
Absolutely. You want to go by the Institute of Medicine, and what they say is, 3.7 liters a day for men, 2.7 liters a day for women. If you're consuming that much water, you're going to be in good shape. Obviously, if you're exercising and in hot temperatures or have increased fluid loss due to illness, you want to increase that amount. But those are the general guidelines that have been developed, and if you're meeting or exceeding those, you're going to be in good shape.
Excellent.
And then, the research out there is pretty consistent on sugar sweetened beverages and the damages that they do. So, I don't like to prescribe to a kind of stark elimination theory that you can't have any sort of thing, but I think that limiting those sugar sweetened beverages is the best case.
Yeah. We've got plenty of sugar in our American diet.
Yeah.
Okay, so next topic, and this is a pretty big one. This has gained a lot of popularity with professional athletes in social media. Is the altitude training mask?
Oh boy! All right, one of my favorites. One of my topics.
So before we kind of launch into that, I guess it's really important to provide some context of what that is, how it was marketed initially when it came out, and how that's changed a little bit. So do you want to take that one?
I'll start with my impetus, and then actually if you kind of introduce it, that'll probably be good. So how this topic came up to me was during my class. I teach an undergraduate class called Performance and Drugs, where we review the physiological mechanisms of performance-enhancing drugs. So that's how I got interested in it.
Very cool. So this has been sort of, I guess, heralded as a new training tool that initially, when it was launched, it was being marketed as an altitude training mask. So typically, if you're going to do altitude, you would have to go up, certain feet above sea level, high elevation, spend, several weeks there training, doing your training to get some of the benefits for cardiovascular training. So, cyclists, rowers, triathletes, tend to do that. But the way that this product is being marketed is that you can use the mask and get those same types of benefits initially when it first came out. And then the marketing kind of shifted to believe you're strengthening the muscles, that are responsible for breathing. Does that sound accurate, Evan?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's called the altitude mask. It has pictures of mountains on the side of it. So if I'm Joe consumer out there, I'm going to envision this thing simulates altitude training. Okay. So I think it's important for us to kind of review some of the physiology that's related to normal adaptations to altitude first. So you come to a place like Laramie. We're at 7,200 feet here. Generally, the threshold is about 6,000 feet above sea levels where you're going to start to see some adaptations. So we're well above that. And I can attest that when I got here, I was in the worst running shape of my life. So running was really hard. So what happens? You get to altitude. You have something called the oxygen dissociation curve. And this kind of principle shows you how intently oxygen will bind to hemoglobin in your blood. And that curve and the binding or the affinity of oxygen to hemoglobin is dependent on the pressure of oxygen in the atmosphere. So as you breathe in, the pressure of oxygen or the partial pressure of oxygen in the air around you will be transmitted into your lungs. And then based on that, the partial pressure of oxygen, it will push the oxygen into your bloodstream across its concentration gradient and then onto the red blood cell. So when you come to altitude, the partial pressure of oxygen goes down. The percentage is the same. So we still have the same percentage oxygen here, but the partial pressure goes down because we have less air above us pushing down on that air around us. So because the partial pressure is lower, we get a slightly lower saturation of our hemoglobin when we're here. What that results in is a little bit lower delivery of oxygen to the muscles. Okay. And you have sensors in your bloodstream that monitor the partial pressure of oxygen. When that's sensed as being below what normal is, signals are sent and your red blood cell production increases. If your red blood cell production increases, your total number of blood cells in your blood goes up. This is artificially how blood doping works. You take red blood cells out, you allow your blood to regenerate, you put the red blood cells back in, and your hematocrit goes up. So the percentage of your blood that is red blood cells goes up. What that means is that per unit of blood, you can carry more oxygen. So when you're at altitude, if you stay at altitude, your performance is not necessarily going to get better, but you'll notice a decrease in your performance when you first get to altitude. And then once your red blood cells increase in your hematocrit, or the percentage of your blood that is red blood cells goes up, your performance will go back to where it's similar to where you were when you were at low altitude. So that's how normal altitude acclimatization works. And then typically what a person will do, they'll come to high altitude, let that acclimatization occur, then go down to low altitude. And before the red blood cells are used up and excreted, because now you don't need that extra oxygen carrying capacity at low altitude, you run your race or do your endurance activity, and you can benefit from that in some sense. It's a small benefit. Overall, it tends to be about an average of about 1% improvement. But if you're thinking about Olympic athletes, for them, that's really good.
Right.
So what does the altitude training mask do? Okay. So the altitude training mask covers your mouth, all right, and makes it more difficult to inhale. So we have to kind of generally break this down and say, does that decrease the partial pressure of oxygen in your lungs? And the answer to that is no. So is it going to decrease the saturation of your red blood cells or the partial pressure of oxygen in your bloodstream? The answer to that's no. So are you going to get stimulus for increased red blood cell production from wearing this device? No. Especially if you wear it for short periods, because they've done studies where they have actually put people in hypobaric chambers, which simulate hypoxia due to a difference in the pressure. And if you don't do that for about 10 hours a day, you're not going to get the benefits of improved red blood cell production. So I generally see people wearing these during their workout. And the thought is, oh, it's going to make it harder for me to do my workout, and it's going to make it harder for me to breathe, and therefore I'm going to produce more red blood cells. But we're missing the stimulus. But the good thing that they do is they do make it harder for you to breathe. So if you're looking to strengthen the muscles that are associated with breathing, they do a good job of that. And actually, the Army has done some studies, and there have been a number of independent studies as well, that have shown improved breathing efficiency with chronic use of these. So I'm not saying that these devices don't work to improve exercise capacity. What I'm saying is that people should understand kind of the physiology behind what they're doing. They're lifting weights with their lungs, and their breathing muscles is what they're doing. Back when I was in college, I remember there was a device called the Power Lung that marketed the same thing. It was basically a snorkel that was hard to breathe in and out of. And you wear it not during your exercise. You'd wear it at different times during the day to strengthen your breathing muscles. So I think it's just important that people understand kind of what that is. And then the other problem would be wearing it during your workout. Because if you're going to be wearing it during your workout, I mean, the purpose of a workout is to get better at whatever sport you're doing. So if you're a runner, you want to run and you want to get the best adaptation you can from that run. If you limit the amount or your ability to breathe during that exercise, you're not going to be able to exercise at as high of an intensity, and thus you're not going to get the adaptations that you would to that. So I think if a person was going to utilize this during their training, they would want to do it definitely not in their high intensity exercise bouts. Like if you were a runner, you wouldn't want to be using it during your mile repeats. You'd be wanting to use it during a different time in your training cycle.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. And you did a beautiful job kind of explaining the actual physiology, what's happening at a cellular level when we do altitude training, and then what's taking place when we're wearing the training mask. So that was excellent.
Yeah, I think the company's been pretty, there may be a number of different companies, but I think they've been pretty responsible in responding to the research and saying, okay, we see that the research is showing us that it's maybe not necessarily increasing red blood cells. There's some articles from 2016, just last year, that show that. And they've said, okay, it's not responsible for us to market it this way. We should market it as what it actually does, which is improve the efficiency of breathing during exercise. And that can have an impact on exercise ability. So I just want to make sure that that's, really clear, that I'm not saying this is, something that doesn't work. It's just saying that when you go out and use it, don't think you're increasing your hematocrit.
Absolutely. That was great. Okay, next topic. Wearable technology for weight loss.
Oh, all right. Another hot topic. We're kind of going all across the board here.
Yeah.
A bunch of different topics. This is a great study that I saw that came out last year in the Journal of American Medicine, and it talks about wearables. Over the past 10 years, these have become a huge thing. Starting with all the different fitness trackers while you were doing your exercise. So they'd be GPS watches. They would be able to tell you your mile time. I mean, when those first came out for cycling and running, they were awesome. And then they started kind of putting these into just general accelerometers that you could wear, and how many steps a day am I getting? So the question then became, okay, we're measuring this. does it help people who are losing weight actually lose weight? And there was no kind of distinct answer for that until we saw a nice randomized controlled trial that came out. It's Jakicic 2016 and the Journal of American Medicine, Effect of Wearable Technology Combined with a Lifestyle Intervention on Long-Term Weight Loss, the IDEA Randomized Clinical Trial. Awesome study. So what they did is they basically took people who wanted to lose weight, and they put them into a number of different interventions. One was control, so they got no intervention whatsoever. Another was a general lifestyle intervention where they focused on behavioral change. And then they had a third, which was lifestyle intervention and a wearable. So they were able to see their steps per day, monitor their fitness. It was able to tell them if they were meeting their goals or not meeting their goals and whatsoever. And, over the course of months, they tracked their weight loss. And what they actually found was the group that just had the classic lifestyle intervention as a whole lost about twice as much weight as the group that was wearing the fitness tracker. Wow. The important point there to also make is that the group wearing the fitness tracker still did lose more weight than the control group, but they lost less than the other group. And kind of the thinking here. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, did it specify what the quote unquote like classic weight loss group did in terms of like activity?
For their what they did for their exercise.
For exercise to lose weight. I was just curious.
They were on a low calorie diet. They had increases in physical activity, and had group counseling sessions. So those were the three things that they worked on. And I'm guessing the physical activity is, kind of low impact, low intensity, because those are generally the least risk we see. So walking and, cycling are generally what are going to be prescribed.
Excellent. Did you have anything else to add? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
Oh yeah, no problem. So it was 24 months. They followed up with them. And kind of they speculate a little bit at the end, and I've heard some commentary on this article as well, thinking that you kind of are going to get responders and non-responders to wearable technology. And this once again gets at kind of the individual versus the population, because I'm sure there are people listening to this podcast right now, or people that somebody knows who is like, I bought one of these things. It's been extremely helpful for me. I've lost a lot of weight, and I know I wouldn't be able to do it without this piece of equipment letting me know that I've taken enough steps. It'll be 9:30 at night, and I'll be 100 steps short, and I'll go for a walk around the block, and that's really helpful for me. So that's the individual. But on the whole, for the population, what the kind of thinking is that people who have these, because they're able to see a number associated with their amount of weight loss, or not amount of weight loss, their physical activity, are going to counteract that by saying, oh, I did 20,000 steps today. That means it's all right if I don't adhere to my diet quite as well. So it gives them a little bit more incentive to match their activity level with their caloric intake. Whereas a person who doesn't necessarily have that feedback of, hey, you took 20,000 steps today, will be like, okay, well, I was just active and I'm going to continue with my diet as I normally would do it. So that's the kind of thinking that when you have that, you might be more likely to stray from the lower calorie diet.
Right.
Yeah. So really good study. I think it's exactly what the field needed. And I think that what it's going to work on is, for these wearable technology, what's going to end up happening is you're going to get better use of them overall. So people are going to say, okay, well, the way we're doing it right now doesn't seem to be working for everybody. How can we improve this to make it work?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And I'm sure that's going to probably have a trickle down effect and affect the way the manufacturers are making some of those devices. They're going to be paying attention to these studies, and they might be making iterations in terms of the technology or the features or the data that's outputted to the individual.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have strong opinions about weight loss and fitness in general, and that and one of the reasons that I got out of the personal training business in general was because I found that it was kind of, you have to be doing it this one way. There's one way to be fit. There's one way to be healthy. And I was not particularly subscribed to that. I think that there's infinite ways to do that. Generally, you have to be physically active, but there's not one right way to do it. You have to find a way that's enjoyable for you, because if you enjoy doing it, you're going to do it more frequently. And overall, consistency is way more important than intensity.
100%. Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, it's funny. It's like usually the kind of typical response somebody gets is, all right, I want to get back into some sort of, workout routine. I want to go to the gym and I need to show up and I need to get my ass kicked. Like I got to work really, really hard.
Yep.
And the fact of the matter is like, okay, that's great. So you do that and you're just completely, flat out exhausted, laying in a pool of your own sweat. And then the next day comes and you're like so sore, you can barely, like, you're hobbling around or you can't move. So now you have to take probably more than one day off to recover,
Yep.
or if you go, you go and do another training session, but it's nowhere near, you can't maintain that same type of effort or intensity level you did the day before because you don't have the base of fitness there.
Right.
And then so what happens is you're running down the slippery slope towards potentially getting an injury or sick. And then all of a sudden now you need to take a big long break again. Whereas if you kind of just are steady and consistent and you show up, and yeah, you'll have your harder days, or tough, really tough efforts or intense efforts. But, for the most part, you need to take something that you can consistently do over a long term, or long time period. Or the way I really try to look at it now is like, what can I try to do for the rest of my life?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm kind of interested. We can swap roles here for a minute and I can ask you some questions
Sure.
about what you do. 'Cause I've been following your business with the Leo training now. And I think it's a really good business and seems like a holistic approach to health. But you tend to do a lot of free weight training, so some Olympic lifts, definitely deadlifts. I see kettlebell training.
Mm-hmm.
What are the other kind of tenets to your training philosophy?
Great question, man. Yeah, so I also do body weight as well. Some higher level, I would say, like, more difficult strength variations of calisthenics. So like for example, like one arm push up or one arm, one leg push up or tactical pull up. I'm still working on a hanging leg raise. So being able to go from that hollow position off the bar and bringing your feet or your ankles in step the shin to the bar. But right now, my goal is to earn the Strong First Level 2 kettlebell certification. So that requires a half body weight military press. So my training kind of revolves around that. But in terms of philosophically, to answer your question, it all depends on the individual, right? So that's the reason I use that example is because that's my current goal, right? But,
Right.
I have some.
You have clients who don't have those goals.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
And so
Great.
I guess probably the biggest thing that, is to quote Dr. Stu McGill, is exercises are just tools, right? So you need to select the appropriate exercise or tool, quote unquote, for that individual and the goal at hand. So, I have some clients that one client, it's specifically weight loss. You know what I mean? Another client, two of them have come to me and they've had, on and off again throughout the years, like chronic low back pain. So for them, being really just, healthy and vital and being able to move around, and, one is a mother play with her kids, and be able to go throughout their day and not kind of be inhibited. I mean, that's huge. they're not that individual's not interested in getting a PR or lifting heavier weight. They just want to be healthy and vital, or have good vitality, I should say. So I think the biggest thing that I try to take away is, how can I take my body knowledge and the things that I know and help them to address those goals that they have. Because I feel like sometimes that it's really easy to, put a square peg into a round hole, and try to force people to go down what we want for them rather than, their inherent goal at hand. So, the one thing I try to do across the board is I always try to improve the way that people are moving, little things, like making sure that they have a very good understanding of, what it means to be able to squat versus hip hinge, versus push versus pull, just, basic movement patterns. And, and usually the initial reaction I'll get from people is, well, I don't really see how that's, going to have carryover. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. I said, you go to a grocery store? Yeah. Okay. Well, you're carrying groceries from, the cart or the grocery store to the car, or then from your car to your house, right? So that's some type of carry. Those are probably at least 20 to 25 pounds. Maybe you have 2 bags, maybe you have more. So knowing how to, if you're a senior citizen or somebody that's older, knowing how to hip hinge, doing a spine sparing movement so you're not flexing through your spine, to me, that has a lot of real world application to it. So hopefully that's an answer to your question, kind of a very long-winded one.
No, I got one follow-up though for you. Mm-hmm. So, I get frustrated sometimes, and this might be my own stubbornness, with people who seem to be putting, the absolute quality of the motion over and above anything else. Mm-hmm. Meaning that unless you can do this movement absolutely flawless, you should not be doing the movement whatsoever, not be doing it loaded. If you don't have the perfect deadlift, you should not be doing a deadlift. How do you kind of toe that line and split it to say, yes, we want to make sure that we have good form. Obviously, we don't want you getting down there and jerking your back and doing that kind of stuff. But there are differences in anatomy. There are different movements that are, maybe not optimally efficient, but still low risk. How do you kind of approach that?
Yeah, totally, for sure. I mean, first off, thank you for asking that question, because that's a pretty lightning rod kind of polarizing question / topic right there, right? And for me, I can tell you when I first started out, whether this was on the strength side or rowing side, I would kind of just drill into how I wanted somebody to look. And so what I've kind of realized is, first and foremost, are they doing it in a manner that's safe above all, right? So have we got them to a high enough level or quality of movement where I know that, for example, let's just use a deadlift. They're not flexing through their spine, right? Is it the most, pretty textbook example? No. I mean, I could point to a couple of my clients that, they have elements that they can tweak. But the fact of the matter is it safe? Number one, all right? You also have to remember that, whether you're working with a high level athlete or, your mother or father or high school student, whoever, you got to keep this fun.
Or college professor.
What's that?
Or college professor.
Yeah, or college professor. You got to keep it fun, right? So it's like if you're so like over the top, like about technique, you can really kind of like push people away and turn them off. So yeah, it's important, but like unless we're talking about like, you know, the 1% that's going for an Olympic gold medal, you know, and dialing it in so you have the absolute like utmost efficiency, first and foremost, it's got to be safe. And then from there, you can always refine it and make it better. But we could have the same conversation about the rowing stroke too.
I was going to bring that up because you see a bunch of different crews out there, and who is it, the Brits or something that has that was crazy laybacks. They just have
No, the Brits are pretty upright.
Okay.
The Canadians with Sprackling back in 2008 had some very aggressive and excessive layback.
And they were good, I think.
Yeah, they won the gold in Beijing. Yeah. They were very good.
Yep.
So it just goes to show you that you can go really fast and win at the highest level, and it doesn't have to be one particular technique or style. Now, will that work across the board for everybody? That's when you start getting into the conversation. How much does, that particular person's physiology and their anatomy, matter? Because, certain ways that you might teach a movement, may impact that individual. So a really easy example would be like if we're doing a deadlift and I try to force someone to keep their feet dead straight ahead, like they're on railroad tracks, and don't let them turn their feet out at all. I'm sure you're aware there's up to 20 degrees variance. In the acetabulum. Yeah. At the top of the femoral head. So I could potentially, if I don't know any better, I could be just, knocking that femur head up into, the hip socket or the pelvis, right?
Yeah. Because
this is what I think their deadlift should look like, quote unquote. Well,
right.
That's just dumb. Like that doesn't make any sense. And that just goes completely against my earlier point, which is, safety first. Right.
Yep.
So there's going to be some variances. Like for me, I tend to turn my left foot out a little bit more than my right. And I know exactly why that is. It's because I don't have as much internal rotation in the left hip. Right.
Okay.
And I don't know if that's structural, like the actual femoral head, or if it's also kind of a byproduct of rowing, sweep on the port side for so many years, because I love to kind of lean into my inside hip, or what was my inside hip, my right leg. All right.
Yeah.
And I just don't have that kind of comfortable range of motion through that left hip.
Interesting.
Yeah. I don't know, but I do know that some things that I've kind of just, as I've become more knowledgeable and observed self-reflections, I'm much more aware and in tune of how I move than when I was in college or directly thereafter.
Cool.
Yeah. You got any more for me, man? I'm kind of enjoying being on the other side of the mic right now.
Oh, man. How do you feel about rowing's inclusion in certain high-intensity exercise programs now that are out there?
Oh, like Orange Theory and...
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, so for the most part, I know what you're talking about. There's I think there's some programs down in New York City and stuff, and they do a lot of high intensity HIIT type workouts or intervals or circuit based type workouts.
Yeah.
The first thing I would say is that again, it comes back to safety. Like you got to have the basic mechanics of the rowing stroke down, and the other thing is that it the erg is not the boat, right? So the big takeaway is, and many of these people may not be interested in getting a boat, and that's fine. But what you do need to appreciate is that the way that it loads the body is completely different.
Okay.
So when you're
saying that is the most efficient erg stroke not the most efficient boat stroke?
No,
Okay.
where I was going is, I mean, that could also be very true. You can get a much lower split on the ergometer, and you could just be, um, one, a pretty big, male or female who's incredibly strong and using your upper body and, covering a lot more distance with the chain. But that won't translate into boat speed on the water.
Right.
But where I was going was in terms of loading up the body is when you're on the stationary erg, um, the the boat's not moving underneath you, right? So what actually
Right.
has
So
to happen,
tech isn't a thing.
right? So there's no recovery where the boat's traveling underneath you. So you actually have to, your body has to physically act as a brake around the release. So that's why tend to feel, or most individuals will make a note of when they get on the ergometer, man, I feel a lot more load in or around my lower back or lumbar spine
Mm-hmm.
is because of that. It loads the body completely differently biomechanically. It also, the requirements are different. So, for example, you need way more ankle, knee, and hip flexion in the rowing shell, and you still need those things on the erg, but you need much more thoracic mobility, thoracic range of motion on the ergometer. So it's different demands on the body, and different loading. So my thoughts is that for the general population, I think it's great that people are moving and they're exercising, but
Okay, good.
you're also in a similar posture where a lot of people are probably going to be sitting 8 to 10 hours at their job.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important that, they're doing a really good warm up and cool down, and they're making sure they work on hip flexor flexibility, making sure that they're doing some, in the warm up, they're doing some, exercises to drilling, glute activation,
Oh, nice.
to work on, thoracic extension and flexion, even rotation, just because these people aren't going to be getting it. They're going to be on railroad tracks, kind of sitting, square, and they're not going to be turning. So getting them kind of out of the sagittal plane and getting them moving in all different motions early on in the session, I think is super, super important.
That's cool. Yeah, I've noticed. I've recently started doing without buzz marketing here, a popular Olympic weightlifting and cardio metabolic conditioning program
Mm-hmm.
that has many different locations and international competitions. And rowing is one of the aspects to that kind of conditioning program. And the cool thing that I've noticed is how receptive not only the other athletes have been when I've kind of offered up some of my past experience from being on a crew team and partaking in all the rowing workouts, all the indoor rowing workouts, that is. So the athletes themselves have reached out to me, and whenever I say, make sure that you get your hands clear of your knees before they break, make sure that you're not starting the rowing stroke with your back, that kind of stuff. But also the coaches and the owners, they've reached out to me personally and been like, hey, this is really valuable information. We as coaches get at our certification program, get minimal amount of time that's devoted to this.
Mm-hmm.
Also, because generally in the programming for that piece of equipment in there is generally in the, I'd say, under 2 minute time frame. So
Wow.
very, very low. I mean, there are very few workouts where you're on there for more than 1,000 meters.
Right.
Right. Or more than 50 calories is another benchmark that's used frequently. So the downside of that is that what you'll see is, people can kind of make it through and muscle through that time domain without having great form. And also the amount of improvement you can get from having good form at first is so minimal. It's not like a deadlift or a clean where if you change your mechanics, you're going to be able to clean 40 pounds more. This is a thing that's going to slightly improve your scores maybe at first. But I've been very impressed by some of the athletes making changes depending on, I'm saying, okay, hey, this is actually a correct rowing stroke, and this would be good for you to employ. So I've been really happy with that, which is cool.
That's awesome, man. That's really cool, and that's great that they've been very receptive to some of the knowledge and expertise you've been able to pass along from your experience as a very high level coxswain in college, and especially with all your knowledge throughout your career now too as well.
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, the first time I did a seminar, I think everybody kind of looked at me and was like, "What is this little dude going to tell me?" I see him in class. He kind of sucks most of the time. Comes in middle of the pack in most of the workouts. How is this guy going to help me? But then as soon as I started kind of actually, talking about the rowing stroke, they're like, "Oh, all right." And then the really fun thing to do with people who haven't done it before is rating work. Have them start at 20 and move on up, every 2 minutes, changing your stroke rate by 2 beats. I just did that with a group yesterday, and it kind of blew some minds a little bit. And to tell them, oh, you don't have to pull as hard as you can every time.
Right.
So that was another interesting piece of information. So really, really fun with that.
Nice, man. That's great. Yeah, it's pacing takes some time to learn.
Absolutely. I mean, I saw that in my dissertation. So during my dissertation, with our perceived exertion group. So they didn't have a heart rate monitor to monitor how hard they were going. And it was interesting. These were people that did not have a lot of experience running. So they were collegiate males who were, above 25 on a BMI scale, weren't currently running. And it was interesting at the very beginning of it. I'd say, okay, well, you're going to run at an RPE of, 13. And what would happen is they'd start out running, get tired, walk, then start running again, and they weren't able to meter their running at all. But by the end of the 6 weeks of intervention, instead of going out and maybe running at like a 16 for a minute and then walking at what would be a 10 for a little bit, what they do is they were able to determine what a jog was, so a moderate intensity run. And it was really cool to see that progression with them over the course of the 6 weeks. I actually just had an email from one of my old participants asking me questions about running today. I mean, I did the study, 4 or 5 years ago, so it's cool to have that contact still and see that they're still out there running.
That's great, man. Nice job. That's outstanding. Is there anything else that you want to touch on topic-wise before we head into the rapid fire questions?
Oh, cool. Rapid fire. I was warned about this. I'm ready.
Who warned you?
Oh, no. Just before we got on the podcast, you said I'm going to do that. So that was my warning.
Yep. So these are non-topic related. This is just for the audience to get to know you a little bit better, but these are all very fun questions.
Before we do that, do you have any questions based on stuff I've talked that relate to kind of your business, or you think your listeners might be interested in? If not, something cool.
I think it would be perhaps not for the general population. I know your hydration studies are focusing on that right now, but I think it would be really interesting to have some, solid guidelines for endurance athletes that are either rowing, triathletes, or cyclists, in terms of, what are some good biomarkers in terms of like looking at their color or consistency, frequency of like, going to the bathroom and the urine color, as well as, what they should be doing because they are performing at, a higher level. And frequency of training sessions. So what are things that they need to be keeping in mind?
Yeah. So this is, you talked about that lightning rod topic for you before. This, in the hydration field, fluid replacement during and following exercise is kind of a big point of contention in the field. There's kind of two camps, and I was just fortunate enough to be on a kind of counterpoint in wilderness medicine, talking about fluid intake during exercise. And kind of one side is saying, drink to thirst. Only drink when you're thirsty. If you drink when you're thirsty during exercise, you will be fine. Okay. And then the other camp, which I tend to be a part of, is, yes, thirst is important, very, very important to fluid intake. But also you should understand what your individual sweat rate is. And if you know you are a very high sweater, 2.5, 3 liters an hour, and you're going to be exercising for a certain duration, you should make sure that you devise some sort of plan. This doesn't have to be a very strict plan where we're trying to replace 100% of fluid losses, but you have to be aware of what your sweat rate is, and gear your fluid intake during that competition training or competition or training to make sure that you're replacing, 80%, or you're not losing excessive amounts of body water, because it's very easy. Because your thirst is going to be, a little bit downplayed during that exercise. So measuring your sweat rate is easy. You just exercise for 30 minutes or an hour at your intensity that you assume that you're going to be racing at. Either measure the amount of water that goes in during that time, or don't drink during that time. Measure your body weight without any clothes on, nice and dry, before and after. And based on your fluid losses, you can calculate how much sweat you lost during that duration, and then you can make your hydration plan based on that sweat rate. So if you're a triathlete or a long distance cyclist who's going to be exercising for more than 2 hours at a time, I would really recommend this. But on the flip side of that, you want to be really careful you don't overhydrate. This gets some press, but I think from my school or my side, there's a tendency to kind of avoid talking about it too much, because we don't want to discourage people from drinking. But what we find a lot is that fluid intake becomes kind of this catch-all for fatigue. People are fatigued during their training, and they're, I must be dehydrated. I drink a little bit more, when that might not be the case. We see this a lot with some of our longer duration marathon runners, our 6-7 hour marathon runners, where their sweat rate's not very high because their exercise intensity isn't very high. So they're not losing a lot of water. And what's happening is, because of the placement of a lot of the fluid stations, sometimes they're, only a mile apart. So for a person who's running 10-minute miles, they could be hitting 6 of these an hour. If they're drinking, half a liter at each of these, the likelihood of fluid intoxication or water intoxication goes up significantly. You don't classically see this with people who are running at higher intensities, because they're not able to replace fluid in line with what they're losing. This isn't to say that their performance doesn't suffer because of this, but there's other factors that are employed here as well. So I think it's a challenging topic because it's very multifaceted. Yeah. But overall, I think the important advice would be to learn your sweat rate at your intensity that you plan to race at in an environment that's similar to what you plan to race at, and then practice that hydration strategy during your training and figure out, okay, is this enough? Is it too much? Maybe you come up with, a good fluid replacement schedule and you find out, it makes my stomach upset. So maybe I need to bring this down a little bit. But having that knowledge overall is really beneficial.
I love it, man. That's great actionable advice that people can put into use.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right, rapid fire. Let's do it.
Rapid fire time. Here we go. So, Evan, given all your knowledge and current level of experience at this point in your life, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself 10 years ago?
I really like the path that I've not really chosen, but kind of taken to get here. I think taking these breaks between all my different schoolings has been important for my own growth. By working for 2 years before I went and did my master's, it really let me treat graduate school kind of as a job, versus like school, where you just show up and you are there between 8 and 5, whether you have participants coming in, whether you have work to do or what, you're just there. That's kind of your job.
That's great, man. That's excellent.
Yeah. So that's the advice I would give myself, is that when you're taking those breaks, don't be worried, because it's going to make you better in the future.
There you go. Rest and getting some space and having time to reflect is a good thing.
Absolutely.
Excellent. What's your favorite strength training exercise?
Whoa, favorite bicep curls? No.
Really? I was expecting you to say pull-ups because I think you were pretty bad at ass.
Oh yeah. No, pull-ups. And there's a story behind that too. The reason that I got so into pull-ups. So in grade school, we had the presidential fitness test. And I remember this was a year, and I was dead set that I was going to get presidential. I don't even know if they do that anymore. You know, it's the mile run, the shuttle run, sit and reach, and pull-ups were one of the things that you had to do for the presidential fitness test. We do this in gym class every year. And I had trained, you know, by running around my backyard and kind of doing some stuff in the living room of my parents' house. You know, I'm like probably 10 or 11 at this time. Got presidential for everything, and the last event was pull-ups, and I needed 11, and I got 7, and I was just absolutely just destroyed, you know, in the way that an 11-year-old can be. So then when I got into resistance training in college and stuff, that was my workout. I'd get in there and just knock out 100 pull-ups at a time, and, you know, not one set. That was one of my classic workouts that I do on off days.
I love it.
So yeah, I'd say pull-ups would definitely be my favorite resistance training exercise.
Nice.
Not bicep curls.
Nice. How has your training changed today compared to 10 years ago?
Oh, so 10 years ago, let's see, what was that? 2007. That was when I was huge into Ironman. I was doing triathlons back then. That was when I was a personal trainer. 2007, I did Ironman Florida as my first one. It was a really good experience. Enjoyed it, and kept doing that till about I'd say about 2012 was what my Ironman stuff. Now my training's much different. Being in Wyoming, we have great access to trails, so pretty much I'd say 80% of my running is now trail running. I do a lot of that. It's not really focused on speed as much as focused in getting out there and really enjoying what we have to offer out here in Laramie, which is, you know, 10 minutes from my door. There's, you know, awesome trails. But then also I've started doing that kind of very popular circuit resistance training / cardiometabolic training that seems to be sweeping the nation right now. And this is a fitness modality that I thought I would never do. I thought it was kind of one of those fad things that wasn't really beneficial. And if I wanted to build strength, I'd do a traditional resistance training protocol, and that would be the best thing for me. But what I've come to find more recently is that the social interaction and having that team atmosphere is more important for me. And it's just like going to practice back in the day. You know, when the alarm goes off at 5 o'clock, you don't want to go. But if you know other people are there waiting for you, you're going to go, and you feel better for the rest of the day. I still remember being back in J Street at GW, rolling in there at 7:30 after being out in the water for 2 hours, sitting there with the whole team, having breakfast, and just watching people walk in and kind of their pajamas and whatever, and just thinking, you know, I probably did more this morning than you're going to do all day. That's
right. I remember you said that exact line during my training visit.
And it's that kind of, you know, it's purposeful arrogance. It's not putting those people down, but it's building yourself up by having that, and that's how I feel. And that's not how I feel now, because I know there are people out there doing 10 times as much as me. But having that team atmosphere is really beneficial. So, yeah, less triathlon, more trail running, more Olympic lifts.
Nice, man. Excellent. Have you ever had an injury? And if so, how did that change your training?
Yeah, all of them. I've had all the injuries. All on my right side. Achilles tendonitis, patellar tendonitis, something wacky with my psoas. I threw out my back playing kickball. That was probably the worst one, and the one that I'm still dealing with to this day is low back injuries. So yeah, threw out my back in 2008 or 2009 playing kickball, and then every once in a while it flares up on me. And one thing I have to be really smart in now is that when deadlifts or any sort of Olympic lifts are programmed, if I'm not feeling good, I need to, you know, make sure that I scale that workout and not be super type A about it, and take my time. I've also found massage therapy. There's, you know, just an awesome massage therapist in town here that I've been working with, who's been very, very helpful. Also a very good physical therapist in town here who I've been working with. And the two of them combined have, helped me to move a little bit better. The physical therapist is big into resistance training exercises and preventative exercises. So after my last episode, probably 6 or 7 months ago, I've been adhering to that. But getting old sucks, I'm not as invincible as I once was. So I have to do a lot of that preventative stuff to keep me going.
I can echo that exact sentiment.
Yeah.
What's one thing that high school athletes should be doing more of to complement their training and their health?
I think some of that movement stuff is huge. We're really lucky here. We have some extremely progressive instructors in our department here in Wyoming, and they're actually going out into some of these high school fitness programs and teaching, high school football players about proper squat mechanics, doing functional movement screens on these athletes, and teaching them about movement. It's really cool. And then kind of from the pedagogy side, you have people talking about what they call fitness literacy or movement literacy. Mm-hmm. Basically, a high schooler's ability to go out and exercise without having that team atmosphere. Because if you think about it, there aren't very many people in their 40s or 50s participating in team sports. So giving them the knowledge of how to be physically active and how to enjoy physical activity without necessarily that support net and having it be intrinsic to themselves. So I think those are things that high school athletes need to learn, because I remember getting out of college and even seeing it, when I was a triathlete working with former collegiate swimmers and that sort of thing. And they said that after collegiate swimming, they had just practiced so hard and so much that after their last practice, they still hadn't been back in the pool because they just wanted to avoid it so much. Yeah. I think, there's a great professor out in Minnesota, William O. Roberts, who gave a great lecture that I saw. He came to do Grand Rounds a few years ago, talking about the benefits of not honing in on a sport too early in an athlete's career, and have the benefit of having a bunch of different sport impulses is very beneficial for lifelong sport enjoyment. And I thought that was a great message.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. You wait till you're older to focus on one and specialize, just be an athlete and enjoy playing.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a runner, do your cross country or do your track or whichever, season you like, but then in your off seasons, do other sports. Totally. Play soccer, play lacrosse, whatever.
Absolutely. What's your best tip to improve recovery after a training session?
Well, I think it's got to be nutritional and sleep based. So, we got that 4-to-1 ratio of carbs and protein that are going to be optimal for muscle protein synthesis. The research out there for protein intake during the day is pretty consistent. We see that, 4 doses of about 20 grams a day is going to be optimal for that, along with some carbohydrate and along with some long chain fatty acids. Those are most beneficial for muscle protein synthesis. That and then sleep. And if you really want to improve your sleep, get your phone out of the bedroom.
Yeah, that's right. I do that.
I purchased an analog clock recently this year. The alarm is so annoying, but I've noticed that I've gone from waking up in the middle of the night multiple times to a little bit more consistent sleep. So if you're an athlete who wants the best sleep possible, you don't need to check Instagram at 2 a.m. when you wake up or check your emails and get pissed off like I do or like I used to. So yeah, get that good sleep, get that good protein intake with good carbs and good fat, and that's going to be your best recovery.
Nice. 3 more. What's your favorite meal?
Favorite meal. Sandwiches are definitely my favorite meal. In general, if I'm going to have to pick a specific type of sandwich, it's going to be an Italian sandwich. It brings me back to my days in DC over in Arlington. You ever go to the Italian store over there?
No.
Shout out to the Italian store over in Arlington, Virginia right now. If you're in the area, go there and get yourself an Italian sandwich. There was a great Tuesday afternoon bike ride I used to do with NCVC while I was cycling with those guys back in the day. And it would be right from the parking lot there. And that's probably the best Italian sandwich I've ever had.
Nice, man.
Yep.
What's one book everyone should read?
Let's see.
Any genre, by the way.
Any genre of book. I just finished reading a book that I think is really important for every American to read, because it's so implicit in what's going on right now in the kind of our health landscape, and it had to do with the opioid epidemic that we're currently going through, and we've been going through for the past 15 years in this country. It's called Dreamland, and it talks about all the different aspects of how opioid overprescription was kind of propagated on the back of one misinterpreted research article. So it links back into what we were talking about earlier. There was one short letter to the editor that was posted that talked about the non-addiction factor of opioids, and the pharmaceutical companies seized on this and said, oh, great, this drug we make is not addictive. Therefore, all doctors should prescribe it. And what that did is it led to the complete overprescription of opioid painkillers. And then as those started to get more and more ingrained in society, people became, unable to afford them. And at the same time, heroin dealers from Mexico were coming up and supplementing the opioid market with really cheap heroin that they were delivering to upper class people, basically like pizza. So, if you go into the upper class, suburban high schools now, heroin use is a big problem. And it comes from this initial misinterpretation of a research article. So I think it's really important for people to kind of understand, we kind of get into our own bubble and we're health and fitness, associated, but I guarantee pretty much everybody out there knows at least one person who has been addicted to opioid painkillers before, and the bad way this can move. So great book, really good book.
Excellent, man. Thank you for sharing that. Final question. Who have you studied or do you continue to study in your career to improve and get better?
To improve or get better. There are a number of people who I work with. My mentor from my Ph.D., Professor Larry Armstrong, is a person who I really look up to. Not because I want to do the same exact science that he does, not because I agree with him on every single point, but what I do is learn from him and his interaction, and his way to kind of navigate the field of science, because it's really difficult. It can become extremely political. Some of us have ideas that are not necessarily popular. Mm-hmm. But knowing the proper ways to state those and kind of how to navigate those situations is really important to your progression in academia. So that was a person who I worked with, and I continue to work with to this day. And that relationship has been extremely beneficial for my career. And just like I said, he's not teaching me how to do stats. He's not teaching me how to particularly design a research study, but he's teaching me how to kind of navigate that research field, which is really helpful to me. And then, reading through any of the studies we've talked about today, some of the authors out there, just by reading those studies have been influential to me as well, and how to really put a big, really well done study together.
Excellent, man. Well, it's been a blast. I'm so glad I got to have you on.
I hope this is the start to our continued communication. Obviously, you don't have to have me. I'll do a weekly segment for you if you want.
Yeah, man, I'd be up for that. But no, seriously, just hang on the line. Let me give you a proper goodbye and stuff, and we can chat about that a little bit more.
Sounds good.
I hope you enjoyed this brand new episode of the Leo Training Podcast. If you found this content valuable, please take a moment, share it on your favorite social media networks such as Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Or, even better, head on over to iTunes and drop in a 5-star review. And absolutely be sure to tune in next week when I drop another brand new episode. And my guest is Master Strong First instructor and founder of Flexible Steel, John Angum.
Thanks for listening to the Leo Training Podcast. Subscribe and get even more expert training tips at www.leotraining.io.